The garage fell completely silent the moment the Ferrari's V12 roared to life, a deep, thunderous growl that hadn't been heard in 24 days. 16-year-old Kayla Ellis stood back, grease on her cheek, her custom-coded app still glowing on her phone. Every man in that shop, including the arrogant owner who dared her, now stared in stunned silence because the girl they laughed at had just done what none of them could. Hi, everyone. Today we're stepping into a luxury auto garage in Phoenix, Arizona, where grease-stained floors shine under polished lights, and reputations are made or shattered without warning. This is a story about what happens when arrogance tries to silence quiet talent and ends up schooling itself instead. One man thought he was issuing a joke, but what he got instead was a wake-up call heard by everyone in the room. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Let's begin. It was a blistering Saturday morning in Phoenix. Sunlight bounced off every metal surface, and the heat had already started creeping into the garage by 9:00 a.m. Inside Ellis & Briggs Restorations, the air smelled like motor oil, rubber, and pride. Every car bay was occupied: vintage Bentleys, a 1969 Mustang convertible, even a partially gutted Maserati sat like a broken promise beneath overhead lights. Raymond Ellis was tightening a manifold bolt on a '72 Jaguar XKE when his daughter Kayla walked in. 16 years old, hair pulled into a bun, grease already on her sleeve. She didn't say much, she never did in public. But she moved like she belonged, like every inch of the garage was an extension of her backyard, where she'd spent the last 4 years shadowing her dad after school. Raymond didn't even look up when she arrived. He just handed her a wrench without a word, and she took her usual perch near the tool cabinet in Bay 3, where a red Ferrari 8112 Superfast V12 sat collecting shame. Then came Carter Briggs' 35 slick haircut, high-end sneakers, mirrored sunglasses even indoors. He wasn't a car guy, he was a brand guy. He inherited the shop from his father, Harold Briggs, who'd built it from nothing. But where Harold saw craftsmanship, Carter saw image. He had turned the garage into a social media darling with hashtags and neon signs, but somewhere along the way the soul had gotten lost. "Tell your daughter to stay out of the way," Carter barked, strolling past with that performative swagger that seemed choreographed for an invisible audience. "This ain't a classroom, Ray." Raymond looked up slowly. "She's not in the way." But the remark had landed. The laughter from the other mechanics wasn't loud, but it was enough. Kayla heard every word. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just wiped her hands with a rag and kept watching the Ferrari, the one no one had managed to fix in nearly a month. The shop quieted for a second when Carter doubled back, gesturing toward the stalled supercar. "Tell you what, if she's such a genius, let's see her fire this baby up." He grinned. "What's the worst that could happen? It already doesn't work." One of the younger techs chuckled, expecting Kayla to shrink, maybe even cry. She didn't. She just said quietly, "It's not reading clean voltage." "Excuse me." Carter tilted his head, still smiling, but visibly annoyed. Kayla stood up. "Your ignition path's starved. Might be a reverse sensor or a faulty secondary relay. Hard to know without tracing it." Now the laughter stopped. That wasn't the kind of language people faked. Carter scoffed. "Okay, prodigy, be my guest. You fix this and I don't know, wax your dad's pickup myself." No one moved. Then Raymond, calm as ever, looked at her. "You don't have to, Kayla." "I know," she said. She walked over to the Ferrari, pulled her gloves tighter, and lifted the hood. A faint hiss of heat escaped, like the machine was embarrassed. Tubes, wires, connectors, a jigsaw of complexity that had driven even the lead technician, Greg, into frustration more than once. Kayla scanned the engine bay like it was a map she already knew. She didn't touch anything at first, just looked. Her eyes didn't dart, they hovered, landed, examined. Then she called out, "Can someone hand me a T15? No one moved. Then Ruben, the shop's loudmouth and prankster, surprisingly tossed her the bit. "All right, let's see what the princess can do." Kayla caught it without comment and crouched beside the open relay housing. She didn't hesitate. She unplugged the main feed and began testing voltages, checking pins with a small beat-up multimeter she pulled from her backpack. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Carter leaned against a nearby post, arms folded. "Y'all better stand clear. I don't want sparks flying. Kayla didn't even glance at him. 15 minutes passed like smoke in a fan. The rest of the team, 10 grown men who'd built careers on torque specs and timing belts, were now watching a teenager pull logic from chaos with surgical grace. She paused, once turned to her dad. Do we have a new clip for the feed socket? Raymond nodded, pulled one from his kit, and handed it over. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said everything. Carter tried one more jab. If you fry that ECU, you're buying a new one. 22 grand, Kayla whispered back. Maybe you should have read the schematic before hiring 3 guys who missed the misroute. That hit. A couple heads turned. Ruben actually snorted. Kayla plugged in the reset lead, opened an app on her phone, something custom, all raw code and manual calibration settings, and started scrolling through the correction table. You can't reprogram that from a phone, Carter said. You can, she replied. Just not if you're guessing. Her thumbs moved fast. Each entry was purposeful. Offset here. Idle curve there. Cold start injection tweaked to match the airflow mod someone had made months ago, but never accounted for in the software. Someone muttered, I forgot we even did that. Kayla stood up. All right, try ignition. Raymond stepped into the driver's seat. A few seconds later, the dashboard lit up. No error codes, no blinking lights. The team leaned in. Crank it, Kayla said. Raymond turned the key. The Ferrari didn't cough, it growled. That deep, predatory V12 rumble shook the air like thunder in a bottle. The shop froze. 1 second, 2, then a soft voice from the back. That thing hasn't started in 24 days. Kayla didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just turned to Carter and said, You wanted it to run. It's running. Carter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For a moment, nobody moved. Not a breath, not a footstep, not a wrench clinked to the floor. The Ferrari's engine purred like a lion finally tamed its low idle, vibrating through the concrete as if it were declaring its own victory. And at the center of that moment, at the eye of the storm, stood 16-year-old Kayla Ellis, her gloves dusted with graphite, a faint grease mark stretching across her cheek, and her eyes calm like she hadn't just pulled off the impossible in front of a room full of grown men who doubted her the second she walked in. Ruben, usually the first to crack a joke, walked over slowly and stared at the dash. Throttle response is clean, he muttered. She nailed it. Greg, one of the older techs, leaned against a rolling tool chest, eyes narrowed in disbelief. Check the AFR. Another mechanic bent over and tapped the sensor display. 12.7. Kayla nodded, then wiped her hands. It's dead on now. Raymond stepped out of the driver's seat and looked at her with something more than pride, something deeper, quieter. Not surprise, not even joy, just that settled warmth only a father could carry when the world finally saw what he already knew. Carter Briggs, on the other hand, hadn't moved an inch. His eyes were locked on the glowing green numbers of the digital readout, like he was still trying to make sense of them. He looked like a man who just bet against gravity and lost. Then, with no ceremony at all, Kayla pulled a folded envelope from the front pocket of her backpack, grease smudges across the edges, and handed it to Ruben. He raised an eyebrow, unfolded it, and blinked. What is this? He said. Ruben turned it around, and the heading was clear: California Institute of Technology. And halfway down the page, full academic scholarship awarded mechanical engineering, advanced design track. Victor, one of the younger techs, actually stepped forward. Wait, hold up. You got into Caltech. With a full ride. Kayla gave a soft shrug. They liked my combustion redesign. What redesign? I built a modular combustion engine with 30% lower waste output. She said, almost like she was embarrassed. Used scrap parts in our home garage. Greg blinked slowly, then let out a low whistle. You built your own engine, just a prototype. In your backyard, Carter asked, finally finding his voice. With what, a YouTube playlist and some prayers? Kayla didn't flinch. With my dad, and a lot of mistakes. Silence again. But this time it wasn't skeptical, it was contemplative, humble. The kind of silence that comes when grown professionals realize they've just witnessed someone rewriting the rules they thought they already mastered. Ruben folded the letter carefully and handed it back. You should have led with that. I didn't think I had to. The guys chuckled, not mockingly now, but genuinely. Something in the air had changed. Respect wasn't just creeping in, it was rooting itself one nod at a time. Carter scratched the back of his neck. You're good, I'll admit it. But one lucky job doesn't mean you're ready for the big leagues. No one said I was, Kayla replied. You're the one who made it a dare. Ruben folded his arms. She's the first one in 3 weeks who didn't overthink that car. Just saw it for what it was and fixed it. Greg chimed in, voice gravelly. Been doing this for 32 years, and I missed that relay path. She caught it in 15 minutes. Carter's jaw tightened. He looked around, but the usual loyalty from his crew was missing. What he saw instead were men standing straighter, eyes thoughtful, arms no longer crossed in defensiveness, but relaxed in recognition. They weren't rallying behind him anymore. Kayla unplugged her phone from the diagnostic port and put her tools away. I wasn't trying to make a scene, she said quietly. I just didn't want my dad to get laughed at for bringing me. That one hit deeper than any engine roar. Raymond didn't say a word, but his hand flexed at his side like it wanted to pat her shoulder but didn't want to interrupt the moment. Victor spoke, next voice a bit quieter than usual. So, what's the plan? You going to be doing this full-time one day? Kyla shrugged again, but there was a light in her eyes now. I don't know yet. I like solving problems. Engines, computers, ideas, it all connects somehow. Greg chuckled. Yeah, you're not just a wrench turner. You're one of those quiet thinkers. Dangerous in the best way. Ruben pointed at her backpack. That app you were using, that yours too. I wrote the software over the summer. The diagnostics were too slow on the tools we had. You built your own scanner. Started with a go-kart, she said. Then lawnmowers. Now this, one of the other mechanics muttered. And I thought my Bluetooth scanner was fancy. The whole shop laughed, real laughter this time. Not mocking, not performative, just honest, shocked appreciation. Carter still looked like he was trying to put the lid back on something he hadn't meant to open. You're not trained, he said one last time, clinging to control. Neither were half the guys you've hired. Kyla replied, soft but direct. That silenced him better than any engine. Raymond finally stepped forward. She's been helping me rebuild engines since she was 12. At first I thought she was just hanging out. Then she started correcting my work. Ruben whistled low. How long you been hiding this, Ray? She wasn't hiding. Y'all just weren't paying attention. Victor stepped in beside Ruben. Well, we're paying attention now. Kayla smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly. Just that subtle kind of smile you give when you finally get to breathe after holding it in for too long. Ruben looked around the bay, then back at her. You know we talk a lot about respect in here, usually in terms of seniority, but today we saw the real kind. Even Carter didn't object. The engine behind them kept purring, smooth, calm, obedient now. But it wasn't the Ferrari they were still watching. It was Kayla. Nobody said much as the shop slowly returned to its routine, but the rhythm wasn't the same. The banter had softened. The ego-driven remarks were shelved. Mechanics who'd once mocked Kayla's presence now eyed her backpack like it held secrets they were only beginning to understand. It wasn't fear. It was awe, the kind that turns into reflection. Kyla walked toward the back corner to grab her water bottle. Her gloves hung from her back pocket and a streak of grease ran across her forearm, but she didn't care. She had just pulled a miracle out of a machine that 10 grown professionals couldn't tame, and she had done it without raising her voice or asking for permission. Carter followed slower than before, hands in his pockets, his voice tight. You're sharp. I'll give you that. But don't let it go to your head. Kayla turned to face him. It's not in my head. It's in the engine bay. He opened his mouth and shut it again. She wasn't being rude, she was being honest. And that truth hit harder than any defiance. Across the shop, Ruben leaned against a post, still chewing on what he'd seen. He pulled Greg aside, voice low. You believe that app she used? I swear it read better than the Scan Pro. Greg nodded. She custom-coded it Rube. Who does that at 16? Victor, who'd been wiping down tools, chimed in. She didn't just fix the car. She reprogrammed how we think about skill. And that was the beginning of the shift. 2 days later, the frame photo appeared. No announcement, no big meeting, just a moment of quiet reverence. It was a printed still frame from the security camera captured at the perfect angle. Kayla bent under the hood of the Ferrari, her fingers buried in wires, the V12 in the background. Underneath it, Ruben had mounted a plaque. The day the engine and we came alive again. It sat above the cracked coffee machine in the break room, and no one questioned it. Carter noticed it immediately. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. He couldn't. The shop had spoken. Later that afternoon, Raymond was called into Carter's office. The room once filled with posturing and corporate bravado was quiet now. Carter gestured for him to sit, which he never did before. "I owe you an apology," he said flatly. Raymond waited. "I shouldn't have spoken to your daughter like that," Carter continued, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. "And I shouldn't have challenged her. Or you." Raymond gave a single nod. "You're not the first to underestimate her." "I don't underestimate her anymore," Carter said. "She's the real deal." They sat in silence for a moment before Carter added, "You think she'd ever want to work here?" After school part-time, maybe Raymond didn't respond right away. He finally said, "She's got other plans." And that was that. The next Saturday, Kayla stayed home working on a small two-stroke engine she'd pulled from a busted weed trimmer. She was in her zone tuning, soldering, testing voltage drops when Raymond walked in with 2 lemonades and a half smile. "She called you dangerous," he said, setting one glass beside her. Kayla looked up. "Who did Greg? Said your brain's the kind you don't see often. Said he felt like he was 20 years younger watching you work." Kayla sipped her drink. "They're not so bad once they stop trying to talk over you. They're changing." Maybe she said, or maybe they just needed someone to remind them why they started. That evening, a knock came at their front door. It was Ruben standing awkwardly with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "Didn't mean to drop in like this," he said, when Raymond opened the door. "Just had something I wanted to give her." Kayla joined them in the entryway, hands still stained from engine grease. Ruben handed her the envelope. "This is for you. From the shop." She opened it. Inside was a certificate. Honorary Lead Technician. Kayla Ellis. It had the shop logo faint in the background, and below that, for technical excellence, leadership under pressure, and reminding us all why we picked up our first wrench. Kayla blinked. Not from emotion, from surprise. "I wasn't trying to earn anything," she said. Ruben scratched his head. "I know. That's why it matters." They stood for a moment in that quiet space between gratitude and transformation. Then Ruben nodded once and left. Kayla didn't hang the certificate in the living room or frame it in gold. She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk, right next to her Caltech letter and her first spark plug rebuild tag from when she was 13. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because it reminded her that she had already changed something bigger than an engine. Back at the garage, the changes continued. Mechanics who used to shrug off questions began asking each other more. Greg ordered a few books on modern engine systems. Victor downloaded a coding app and started tinkering with simple scripts. Even Jameer, the youngest tech fresh out of trade school, began bringing a notebook to work, not just to take orders, but to record what he didn't understand yet. One of the most unexpected changes, Carter stopped barking. He still walked the floor, still watched from the sidelines, but he didn't interrupt anymore. And more importantly, he stopped pretending he had all the answers. The garage wasn't just repairing cars, it was rebuilding its own identity. 2 months later, Carter posted a job listing for an apprentice, a female one, and no one rolled their eyes. The shop was ready now, and Kayla. She never came back. She didn't have to. By the time fall rolled around and the morning air in Phoenix cooled just enough to make the heat bearable, the garage on 5th Street was no longer the same place it had been that Saturday when Kayla first stepped under the Ferrari's hood. Something in the walls had shifted quietly, permanently. It wasn't dramatic. There were no signs posted, no memos sent around. But anyone who paid attention could feel it. The jokes were different now, less about who didn't belong, and more about how much everyone still had to learn. Guys who once prided themselves on knowing every bolt by heart were asking more questions, listening longer, checking their own assumptions at the door. Ruben had started keeping a running list on the shop whiteboard, things we thought we knew. Each time someone caught a mistake or discovered a smarter way to solve a problem, they wrote it down. "Don't skip the secondary relay check" was the first one, written in blue marker with a smudged thumbprint next to it. No one erased it. Even Jameer, the youngest tech, had added his own, "Don't let pride keep you from learning." Meanwhile, Carter Briggs, the man who once treated the garage like a runway for his ego, had grown noticeably quieter. He stopped correcting people mid-sentence. He let the senior techs train the rookies. Most of all, he stopped treating Raymond like a relic and started treating him like a resource. One Friday afternoon, Carter pulled Victor aside while the two were cleaning out the parts locker. "You remember that day she fixed the Ferrari?" Victor laughed. "Man, how could I forget?" Carter nodded slowly. "I replayed the footage that night. Not the engine, not the data logs. Just her face. The way she worked. Like she could see the whole thing in her head before she even touched it." Victor didn't say anything. She wasn't trying to beat anyone, Carter added. She just couldn't let her dad be embarrassed. That part stuck with him. It stuck with everyone. Raymond, for his part, never brought it up again unless someone asked. And when they did, he simply said, "She was always watching. You just never looked." One mechanic, Rick, quiet and built like a fridge, had a ritual now. Every time a new car came in, he'd touch the corner of the photo above the coffee machine before heading to his bay. He said it reminded him to stay humble. "She didn't tell the engine what to do," he once explained to Greg. "She asked it." Even the clients noticed. One older customer, a retired Air Force pilot named Don, mentioned during an oil change, "The vibe in here's different. Like y'all stopped trying to impress each other and just started doing the work." And it was true. That Saturday had cracked something open, a door they didn't know was locked. Kayla didn't just fix a machine. She rewired how they saw people, especially the quiet ones, especially the ones who weren't expected to belong. Back at home, Kayla kept building. Her bedroom looked more like a lab than a teen's sanctuary. A half-disassembled go-kart sat next to a 3D printed model of a combustion chamber she was tweaking. On her desk, 3 different microcontrollers blinked as she tested a new sensor mapping system. She didn't talk much about what happened that day. But one evening, while helping Raymond clean out the backyard shed, she pulled a dusty shoebox off the shelf. Inside was the spark plug from that Ferrari. Still dirty, still slightly warm in her memory. "You kept this?" Raymond asked. Kayla nodded. "It was the moment I realized I could be more than just someone's assistant." Raymond didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just smiled and patted her shoulder. By Thanksgiving, news of what had happened in the garage had quietly spread beyond their shop. A friend of Greg's from another dealership reached out to ask if Kayla would be interested in speaking to a group of high school students about engineering. She declined. "I'd rather build than talk," she said simply. But word kept traveling. One mechanic from a neighboring shop stopped by just to see the Ferrari. He walked through the bays nodding at the techs, then pointed at the photo on the wall. "That the girl who fixed it?" Ruben smiled. "That's the girl who taught us all something." Another month passed. Then one crisp December morning, the shop received a thick envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a black and white shot of Kayla working in her home garage surrounded by small tools, an open laptop, and a diagram drawn in marker across the garage wall. Taped to the back was a note, "Keep learning. I'm still building too." Carter taped it to the inside of the supply room door. No announcement, no big moment. Just a message from a girl who wasn't asking for applause. She never had. But even in her silence, she was still guiding them, still challenging them to look deeper, to ask better questions, to stay sharp. That was the thing about Kayla. She didn't just change the way a team looked at one broken car. She changed the way they looked at each other, at themselves, at what it means to know something, and at how much more there always is to discover. One engine, one afternoon. That was all it took, and none of them were the same. By early spring, the transformation was no longer something the team talked about. It was just the way they operated. New hires came in and were taught not just how to torque a bolt to spec, but how to ask why it mattered. Apprentices weren't laughed at when they suggested alternate diagnostic paths. And the break room whiteboard had become a rotating library of lessons learned, wiring diagrams sketched out over lunch, and even quotes pulled from old manuals in unexpected places. At the very top of the board, still untouched, were 6 bold words written in thick red marker. "Ask it, don't assume it." No one had to say who wrote that. They all knew where it came from. On the wall next to the front desk hung a new edition. A customer named Avery, an amateur photographer and loyal client, had snapped a photo of the team gathered around the Ferrari that day. It wasn't staged. In the image, Kayla was stepping back, wiping her hands. The engine was running, humming in the background, and the team around her looked stunned, thoughtful, humbled. The plaque underneath read simply, "Awakened." Raymond rarely said much about that day, but when asked, he'd smile and say, "She showed them what real focus looks like." Then he'd go right back to working on whatever car was in front of him, classic, hybrid, or import. It didn't matter. His craft hadn't changed, but the shop around him had. And still, Kayla didn't return. She didn't need to. In March, her Caltech welcome packet arrived in the mail. Full summer access to research labs, a stipend to begin prototyping her clean engine design, an invitation to present at the Young Innovator Summit in the fall. She didn't say much about it. She just printed out the schedule and tacked it to her corkboard right next to the honorary lead tech certificate and a sticky note from her dad that simply read, "You were always meant for more." At school, her classmates barely knew the depth of what she was doing. She didn't talk about the garage or the scholarship or the app she was refining to help amateur mechanics bypass clunky legacy tools. She just showed up, did her work, and went home. But the quiet ones, the ones who noticed, they started to sit beside her more often, ask more questions, listen a little harder. One Thursday night, Raymond got a call from Ruben. Not unusual, they kept in touch now. Swapped tool recommendations, talked shop, and occasionally life. "She's still building stuff?" Ruben asked. "Every day," Raymond said. Ruben paused. "Tell her we finally hired that female apprentice. Name's Maya, 23. Got a background in electronics and a real knack for wiring. Quiet as a mouse but sharp. I think Kayla would have liked her." "I think she already does," Raymond replied. And it was true. Even without stepping foot back in that garage, Kayla's presence lingered like a blueprint etched into the concrete. You could feel it when someone double-checked their work or when a senior tech made space for a younger one to take the lead. You could hear it in the way people talked, less about ego, more about execution. Because that's what Kayla had taught them. Not with lectures, not with arrogance, but by standing still in the face of doubt and calmly showing the room what truth looks like when it's wired to purpose. One day as Raymond was packing up to leave work, Carter approached him by the time clock. His voice was low, almost awkward. "I read that scholarship letter again," he said. Raymond looked up. "Yeah," Carter nodded. "She's going to build something huge one day." "She already did," Raymond replied, then clocked out. Later that night, in the cool quiet of their home garage, Kayla sat on the floor surrounded by parts. Coils, wires, heat sensors, and a half-assembled test rig. Her laptop screen glowed with columns of data, and her soldering iron rested neatly beside her. Her fingers moved with calm precision, not because she needed to prove she belonged, but because she knew she always had. Raymond walked in and leaned against the doorframe. "You think the next garage she walks into will treat her differently?" he'd once asked Ruben. And now, watching her, he smiled to himself. "I think the ones that don't will be left behind." Some stories don't need explosions or raised voices to leave a mark. Some just need a moment, one clear, undeniable moment where truth steps forward and quietly reclaims its space. Kayla Ellis never wanted the spotlight. She didn't fix the Ferrari for attention. She didn't write code for praise. She wasn't trying to shake the room. But when you carry truth in your hands, when your focus, your work, and your respect for the craft speak louder than any insult you don't have to raise your voice, the room will quiet itself. In a world that often mistakes volume for value, Kayla reminded everyone what real power looks like. It's not just in knowledge. It's in knowing when to speak and when to let your actions do the talking. It's in lifting your father's name, not with rebellion, but with brilliance. And it's in leaving behind more than applause. It's leaving behind a shift in mindset, in culture, in how we see those we overlook. If you ever find yourself doubting your place at the table, remember Kayla. Remember the girl with grease on her cheek and fire in her veins. She didn't storm the gates. She rewired them. And when she left, they were still humming with everything she changed. So wherever you are tonight, whatever road you're on, ask yourself this. What would happen if you just refused to shrink? Sometimes the world doesn't need you to prove you're ready. Sometimes it just needs you to show up.